Someone was like, your joints are too strong and too big. Can you make little ones? So we made micro tokes. Those wouldn't have existed probably if that guy hadn't asked for it. And then people were like, oh, your weed's too strong. I want some lower THC options. So because we also used to be a hemp farm, there are some strains that we cultivate that are either type 2 or just really, really low THC, high CBD, CBG. And then we also used to be a medicinal tea farm. So we were like, oh, low dose options. We could also blend in smoking herbals. But those ideas literally all came from basically customer requests.
Welcome to Flourishing in Cannabis, where I bridge the gap between the plant and technology while focusing on the human aspects of the industry. My name is Vien, the Director of Marketing here at Flourish Software. My guest today, she hails from the East Coast. She's a published author of a young adult book and is now the Director of Sales and Operations for Supernaturals New York, a microbusiness in Hudson Valley. Let me welcome Beck Rouke Mooney. Hi, Beck. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Vien. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I really appreciate you being on. I know we tried to schedule this a couple of times, so finally got the time for us to meet. But again, I've done a brief introduction on who you are. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your background prior to cannabis and then into the cannabis space, please?
So I used to be an English teacher. I was a middle school English teacher. And then I actually became a published author. I wrote a young adult coming of age novel. And along that trajectory, my spouse actually had a pretty serious illness. And cannabis was actually like the best medicine for all the various different ailments that he was facing. And it just took what had been kind of like a lifelong interest in something, and it turned it into an area that I had more expertise in. And then that kind of just, the rest of it went from there.
Very interesting. And and I do believe that you're originally from Providence, Rhode Island, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in Providence, Rhode Island. I grew up in Massachusetts, just over the border. And actually, when cannabis became legal in Massachusetts, my dad started growing for the first time in many years because he had actually stopped growing during the Reagan administration when they would take your property if they found cannabis on your property. So it kind of, that was before New York had legalized, Massachusetts legalized, and then Rhode Island has like a really great medicinal program. And when I was in the medicinal program in New York, we had reciprocity. So I actually used to go to Rhode Island to the program a lot to get really great products from their small batch cultivators.
That's amazing. And you said about Massachusetts. Have you heard that Massachusetts and Maine, they're actually looking to roll back the adult use program? How do you feel about that?
I have not heard that. Roll back in the sense of like entirely or of certain portions of it?
Well, it looks like from what I've read, they're looking to actually trying to just like pull it back entirely from a legislation standpoint.
I mean, Massachusetts, it's so ironic, but before New York legalized, I've never seen so many people at the border of Massachusetts and New York, like waiting in line for businesses standing outside. I can't even imagine the amount of tax dollars they've pulled in. That would be drastically short-sighted. What is the platform for why?
With the current government administration, there seems to be a lot more anti-cannabis overall in general, and that's what's leading to both Maine and Massachusetts looking to claw that back. And it is very interesting. I know that they've tried to implement that. I know that this is more international, this national. They're trying to do it in Thailand, but I'm not seeing the ability to really put the genie back in the bottle. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with that overall.
It seems like nonsensical, obviously, to go through all this effort of creating an entire program and then making it disappear. But I feel like that's what it's like to work in the cannabis industry, right? Like, it's like, oh, like, what are your daily operational struggles that you're dealing with? And, oh, did you hear states are maybe going to get rid of their program? Like, it's a very unsettling.
It's very unsettling, and as we all know, that it is extremely tumultuous at all times. I mean, there's never a dull day in cannabis. I think I've said that at least multiple times every time I have this podcast, but it's very different of an industry. I mean, I know that everyone thinks that it's trying to be just a regular CPG. Obviously, it's not. But like we are always trying to adopt new policies and procedures and adapt to the ever-changing rules and regulations that are coming down from each state. So we'll see what happens here. I know today's election day, so when we record this, everyone knows it's November 4th. So we'll see where it goes from there. But I'd like to learn a little bit more about your journey into cannabis. I know that you said that your father, he started his little collective garden, but your path into cannabis obviously has been influenced probably by your father, by your husband's ailments that has led to him being a user of cannabis for medicinal purposes. But let's talk a little bit more about your journey too into the industry, how you got into it, and then where you are now today with Supernaturals New York.
Yeah, so cannabis has really always been a part of my life, but because I'm in my 40s, so I was a part of the DARE generation. And like I mentioned, it was the Reagan administration, your property could be seized. But before my parents had their own house, they actually all rented these little cottages in this little ramshackle area down by a river. And they and their friends had this like collective garden. And then when the deal was, when my parents like moved to my grandmother's house and they bought it, my mom was like, no weed can grow here because we can't lose this property because we actually like own it. And so then for forever, it was just like this thing. I didn't know about it. We didn't talk about it, but it was always, there would be the people in the circles, like off on the side. And you knew that people like smoked something, but there was something so healing to me about the journey of legalization, both when it legalized in Massachusetts and finally my dad could have a legal garden inside. And then when New York legalized medicinal, I got my medicinal license in 2017. And the New York medicinal program was pretty abhorrent. When it first started, you could not even get whole flower. You could not get any flower when it started. And a lot of the vapes, it was like when the vape crisis was happening, and a lot of the vapes, like the things that they were like including were like the problematic ingredients that like shouldn't be in vapes. Like, and I was like, you're not allowing me to use flower. You're forcing me to use a vape in the medicinal market. And then you're putting stuff in there that's bad for me. But then when New York finally went legal, then that was like when home grow was finally legal. And I had actually always really wanted to cultivate at home, but for various reasons, we never had. And then when finally we could legally start cultivating in home with 2 medicinal licenses, we were like, okay, let's do this. And I pretty much just like fell in love with it. But at the time I had also been trying to find like a different career. I had been a teacher, I had written novels, and I needed something. My spouse was basically now well enough that I could like go back into the workforce and no longer needed to be a caregiver. And when I applied for a bunch of jobs at first in the cannabis industry, mostly with MSOs, because like if you go on Indeed, there's like, oh, get a job with this company, get a job with this company. I was like, whatever kind of. But I wound up, there was this more interesting job from this company that was like, they were setting up what they referred to as mobile agile infrastructure for small farms to be able to use for post-harvest. And it actually lured me with like, they were like, oh, we're going to bring great wages to post-harvest. And we're going to like take this thing that's usually kind of like a bad job and we're going to turn it into a good job. That didn't turn out to be so true, but I did actually get some real hands-on experience and realized like, I liked being a part of a team. I liked the startup thing. There were some aspects I didn't like about it, but some of it I really did. Like people who thrive on kind of that, like we're solving problems, we're doing things. Like I learned I was kind of that person. And I learned a lot about like we were using the Mobius trimmers. So I learned a lot about post-harvest equipment. And basically within the first like client engagement where we were at a farm, I had kind of recognized that this was not the job that I wanted, but I did know that this was the industry I wanted to be in. So I actually networked with the farmer who was there. And it turned out cannabis industry, he was about to cut like 80% of his staff. And he was like, I'm not hiring. He was like, but my friend actually is. And at the time, my boss, Jens, was hiring for basically a cannabis grower showcase representative, because the cannabis grower showcases were like a temporary solution initially. That was because there was an injunction that held up the dispensaries that were supposed to be opening in like the Hudson Valley and other locations. So I became very quickly like a hand trimmer. I basically brought a little hand trim crew over because at the time we had a flower line out in addition to the pre-rolls. And I would spend some days hand trimming at the farm, being paid by the pound, like classic hand trimmer style. And then my other days, I would go down to a local city and I would do direct consumer interactions about the brand and move a lot of product. And then actually that, like, eventually my boss was like, hey, like, I'd love for you to be, he didn't have many full-time employees. He had like 3, I think, at the time. And he was like, I'd love if you could join us. And so I went from like being a hand trimmer to like, then I was actually making the joints. Then I actually learned Flourish. I was tasked with compliance and our first attempt at third-party software and seed to sale tracking. And yeah, and now I'm the director of operations and the head of sales.
Amazing, amazing. And so let's talk a little bit more about this cannabis grower showcase, because it sounds like very similar to like a farmer's market that was allowed at some point in time within New York, where you can then go out and go direct to consumer. Tell me about that experience and tell me about the things that you learned when having that CGS available at your disposal.
It was so cool. It was one of those things. It was like a creative solution to a problem that wound up with some experiences that we wouldn't have gotten to have if we hadn't had that problem to begin with. And largely, there's not really a lot of chance other than pop-ups and like vendor brand events. There's not a lot of time where you have a lot of one-on-one with customers. And because it was set up in that farmer's market style and they would go around, they basically had a menu and they could go around and like chat with each of the tables. And then they would note on the menu what they wanted and they would go up after that. So we had people come week after week. There were people who were coming from far away. There were people who were requesting that we make certain things that we wound up making. Someone was like, your joints are too strong and too big. Can you make little ones? So we made micro tokes. Those wouldn't have existed probably if that guy hadn't asked for it. And then people were like, oh, your weed's too strong. I want some lower THC options. So because we also used to be a hemp farm, there are some strains that we cultivate that are either type 2 or just really low THC, high CBD, CBG. And then we also used to be a medicinal tea farm. So we were like, oh, low dose options. We could also blend in smoking herbals. But those ideas literally all came from basically customer requests. Like I think about it, a lot of times if we're going to develop something now, I'll go around to dispensaries and I will ask like the managers, the inventory folks, the bud tenders, I'll do like research that way. But still, unless I'm like actually at a pop-up, I'm very rarely actually having that direct interaction with customers. And it just became like a thing we really looked forward to. There's people who we're still like close with. Like they'll reach out and be like, oh, I saw you get the new one. Like, and like, oh, they'll go to their dispensaries and they'll be like, you don't have my Supernatural.
And how long have you been with Super? So, you've been telling this story. How long have you been with Supernaturals for?
2 years, about 2 years. Yeah, I started in October of 2023. In cannabis years, that's basically like 10 years.
Yeah, I get it. But so now that there is no, because I'm familiar with it. So you currently, Supernaturals was an adult use, was a conditional cultivator.
Under the AUCC, we could do everything. So like it was like you could do your own distribution, you could do all this stuff. Now, if you have like a full tier cultivation thing, you also have to do a distribution license. And now we're a micro, because the way that we could basically do what we were doing under the AUCC and do a little bit more at a smaller scale was to do the micro.
Got it. And with now that there's no more CGS, how is it when it comes to getting feedback from customers? Is it still just making connections, working those relationships within dispensaries, or do you work really closely with a lot of the other? Because I know that Hudson Valley has a really great cannabis community. So do you have meetings? How are you all exchanging information? How are you all working together to ensure that your products are the ones that are being showcased and you're working together to sell your products and also support the other cannabis community within Hudson Valley?
We are really fortunate. We've got a great agricultural community here, predating the cannabis agricultural community. And now we're a region that really loves small businesses. We love buy local. We're farmers market heavy. It's like the region where we are particularly is close enough to the city that, there's still, it's rural, but there's like a fair amount of socioeconomic abundance pockets that you can tap into. So people who will pay for the $8 tomato is always the example that I use. And we're fortunate. That's something that we're starting to think about as a community. So I've always wanted like a little thing that's like grown, if it's a dispensary in our county, like a grown in Ulster County, and then just like some more kind of like local designations that we're starting to think about that we could have kind of like to create that lane and make sure that customers and bud tenders and everyone is educated about like what makes that lane special. There's potential kind of, I was talking with someone about there's in California, there's like sun and earth, there's different like designations you can do that are like sun grown in living soil with certain kind of like regenerative practices. And then if maybe there's like a bunch of us doing that, we could have a certification that's kind of like locally organized. We've been talking a lot about that kind of stuff, but in terms of actually engaging with customers, that's actually like, so where we're currently situated in the market, we have really realistically, like for the size of our operation, we have more demand than we have supply. And so for us at this point, some of like what is a typical kind of field work, brand rep, marketing arm of a brand is kind of like less relevant for us. Like I can't really justify the expense to send people to go stand in dispensaries for a few hours to maybe move an extra few units. But I'm starting to think actually about how do we kind of collect, I think of it more like the mycelial network of like the cannabis industry. And there's different parts of that, right? There's like your local ecosystem of like, we have the Hudson Valley Cannabis Roll Call, which is all of us small businesses who get together and like support each other and do that stuff. We have these ideas of like designations and kind of like organization bodies. But then like how do you also just like connect to people who are fans, because at this point we do have kind of a reputation for like super fans. Like there's people who will literally tell me the name of the supernatural super fan who got them hooked on our line, and there's like certain ones, there's like certain bud tenders who are very well known and people are like, oh, like Mike the Highest turned me on to that, blah blah blah. And so I'm really at this point, I'm a writer and like I'm a very like relationship centered person. Like to me sales are, it's like it's about your product, but it's really about relationships. And I want to kind of transition out of focusing just on those like sales environments and think more about like pulling people closer to us with like newsletter and pulling people closer to us with like details about us. Like they like us, they want to know more about us, they want to know more about our small operation. And that's where I do think like a small operation, like you can't just do the cookie cutter things that like a, I don't know, like a vape brand from California is going to have certain strategies in the market that are going to work for them. Those strategies are going to both be outside of my budget, and they're also going to be things that maybe aren't what I actually need. Like when we look at like where we are and what we're dealing with currently, it's like we try to actually create like custom responses to things as opposed to like just going with whatever the normal industry standard would be. So that's kind of the direction we're moving into in terms of Q1 and Q2 with our advertising, is thinking about how do we pull people closer? How do we let them in more? How do we build that relationship so it's even stronger than it already is?
Absolutely. You brought up some great points. And the thing that I love about what you've said, and also your background within Supernaturals, you not only head up sales, but you head up operations. And typically those two pieces are run by two totally different people. And the mindsets are very different. So for you to be able to understand the operations and also the sales aspects and the relationship building around it, it makes you a jack of all trades. It makes you very versatile of a person within the cannabis space, which is really interesting.
But I do find that those pieces actually like they're so connected. So like I'll go out and I'll drum up a bunch of sales, but then like like you have to know that the operation can sustain the sales. And then like, it's just kind of like a dance back and forth between sales goals and operations.
And from a tech side of the house, right, when I first started here at Flourish Software, my background is very eclectic too. Let's see here. I mean, retail banking started out as like a Chase banker, like selling mortgages and home equity lines of credit. Back during the credit crunch, back in like the real recession, the bubble burst right around, was it 2008-ish? And so then transitioned to doing like analytics, back office finance, but then focused on going into product marketing and understanding. That's kind of like a nice kind of a happy medium place where you learn about the product, you understand how that works, and then you're able to market and sell it. So having that kind of like that sweet spot of what you're doing in your space is very similar to what I like for what I do in my role here. You did bring up some other great points about advertising and about competing against the larger California brands. And so there's two pieces. One, going to some of these trade shows here that I've been to. I went to On the Revel. That's the last trade show I was at in New York, and that was in September. And seeing these big manufacturers that have all the California lines, they're taking up 4, 5, 6 booths, and then you have some of our smaller operators that have been there, and they have a tent, but they have to be a little bit more creative because they are competing with some of these much larger brands that have that brand name recognition, that have $1 million budgets to be able to spend on these events. So that's a one piece that I noticed. Another thing that I noticed when I was in New York is I went to a dispensary I think it was close to Chelsea. It was actually called Chelsea. That was the name of the dispensary. And there you go. And so that's where I'm going with this, is that I actually bought your product there because you are a Flourish Software customer. So when I went out there to New York, I bought your product. And I wanted to kind of touch on this because, again, you're in Hudson Valley. That demographic and the networking and relationship building within Hudson Valley, I assume, just based on being from Illinois and working and I was also in the military, working with people, there's what we call the Illinois National Guard and the Chicago National Guard. And so you have the inner city National Guard within Chicago, and then you have like the central Illinois National Guard armies. And the soldiers, the mentality, their upbringings, just the social economic stats, they're so different. So you have to be, as an officer, you have to be very versatile in how you speak and how you deliver your messaging. So I want to ask you, because I assume that being in such an area that has such high foot traffic, to see your product there, and then also know that you're working within Hudson Valley, how is the sales process different, or how is the relationship building difference between New York City and Hudson Valley, if there is one?
That's an excellent question. So New York I'm from Massachusetts. It's a smaller state. And New York there's like microclimates of like different culture. And you have like the city, you have Westchester, which is like not quite upstate. It's like the bedroom community of the city. And then you start getting north of that and you're in like the mid Hudson Valley. And then you have like the capital region with like Albany. And then you've got all these other regions, like you've got the Adirondacks, you've got Buffalo, you've got Rochester, you've got Syracuse, you've got all the Finger Lakes down to the southern border by Pennsylvania. You have where we live and like where the foothills of the Hudson Valley meets the Catskills. And they're all different. Like they're all so different. And one of the things that helped us early on was actually just kind of like a chance random thing. So we had a bunch of because there weren't a lot of dispensaries and we were one of the first licenses on the market, we had a lot of inventory that was created before I joined the company. And there weren't enough dispensaries open and we didn't have enough accounts to move it all. So there is this dude, he's a great guy named Naz. He has a brand called Dr. Midtown, and he was a legacy dealer, and he basically was looking for a product that he wanted to put his name on. So the deal that my boss had worked out with him was that it was our joints, and then it was like his sticker. And essentially, we were breaking into like Buffalo, we were breaking into like Rochester. There were the CGSs going on in our region, so we had some sales moving there. But my boss, believe it or not, was not convinced that we would be able to make it into New York City. Like there was not really he thought it was going to be too hard. We weren't going to be able to do it. Who cares about our pre-rolls? Like whatever, this is New York City. They can have anything they want. And I just started this pitch that was basically, hey, Dr. Midtown is our like city vibe. And then Supernaturals is our upstate and chill. And I would be like crystal waterfalls, like moss under your feet, like Rocky Creek. Like I would just be like, oh, like if you want the Dr. Midtown, cool, you got your city vibe. If you want the upstate, and to be honest, upstate New York has never been so hot as it is right now. Like literally, like the pandemic kind of gave this resurgence of, it was like people were like, oh, right, I remember, it's amazing up there. But normally they were just like, oh yeah, that's upstate. All of the hotels were old and crumbling, and then they were all patched up and revitalized. So there's been this like resurgence of kind of that city interest in the upstate. Like there's nothing more popular than like upstate New York and Brooklyn. It's just like, so it's actually a thing that kind of, when it comes to knowing your demographic, like I suppose that was literally me knowing that when city people think of upstate, they want to feel like it's a vacation. They want to feel like they're supernatural. Like, and it worked perfectly with that vibe. So we did go from having like very few dispensaries in New York City to now, of course, most of our dispensaries are in the boroughs just because there are so many more. And Chelsea Cannabis, that's the one that you bring up. I often will tell people that when I'll give them as an example of stores that like, there will be stores that will want to carry my stuff, but they're like a store that wants you to do a lot of pop-ups and they want you to come train all their bud tenders and they want you to do all this stuff that early on I was running around and trying to do all of that. But as the operation gets more and more complicated, there's just not time for that. And I just found out it's not as like valuable. Like there's not as much return on investment on doing a pop-up in a dispensary. I started to see it only primarily as relationship building. And then I started to think about how could I build relationships in different ways that I actually do have bandwidth for, that I have resources for. So Chelsea Cannabis, we never did a bud tender training. We literally have never done a pop-up. And they are they're like top 5. They're in our top 5 accounts. And they immediately shut up. They move the weed. Like they know what they're doing. It's a good fit for their store. It's a good fit for their clientele. Their bud tenders love it. But I've started to kind of use that gauge where it's like, it's not that I don't want to do a bunch of stuff for my vending partners. It's that I can't. So so I will now say if someone's like, hey, are you open to accounts, blah, 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 blah. If I am, I'll go through like a realistic thing. The same thing I do when someone wants to come work at the farm. And I'm like, okay, after 3 weeks, you're going to be like, it's not camp. It's actually a job. And there's going to be hardship. And you're going to be like, do you want to stay here? Do you want to deal with what we live with on a farm? I do the same thing with our vending partners. I'm just very direct, very upfront. We're a small team. We have limited human resources. If you're looking for someone who can show up all the time and pop up and blah, 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 we're not your guy. And I actually find that people respond really well to that. When I tell them, hey, we're a team of literally there's 10 of us and we do everything. They're like, I had no idea. I thought I assumed you guys were so much bigger than that. And so I'm just finding that's our thing, right? Is being small and having our quirk. And so the more we can lean into that, whether you are in Buffalo or Albany or a rural town in the Catskills or New York City, that's the thing. Authenticity is the thing that sells, and being real and making sure your products are authentic and are real, that you are authentic and you are real. New Yorkers love realness, no matter where you are.
I get it. No, I mean, Chicago is very similar too. We're very straightforward. I think we're a little bit nicer to the face, but I still think that New York is real, but you might get the attitude first. But a lot of people, New York gets a bad rep of just being always aggressive. I've been very fortunate to meet some nice people in New York.
Upstate New York is friendlier. We're friendlier.
Yeah. For sure. We're going to take a real quick pause here. For all of you that are listening, thank you very much for listening. For all of you that are watching us on YouTube, press the like, press the subscribe button. We really appreciate your support. This is some really great stuff. I love the fact that you have all this insight, especially, like I said, I've seen your product and I bought your product in New York City. But when it comes to New York, we do have a couple other things going on. We have the transition coming up here in about a month from BioTrack to Metrc. That's something that was just announced. Just want to put it out there that we did in Flourish, our team, we listened to the webinar that happened last week. So we are on par right now to move over from BioTrack to Metrc from a track and trace standpoint, and we'll have that integration ready by the time that everyone is going to be up and running. But kind of a interesting fact is that I believe that you were on a software and for some time, then came back to Flourish. We have to tie in the technical aspects, the technology aspects of the industry that's being a member of the Flourish Software team. But why don't we talk a little bit about that? I know that you had moved over, you were with Flourish, came back to the club, came back to the family. Just want to kind of hear about your transition back and forth, and welcome back to the family also as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we love Flourish. We live in a very rural property. So like our driveway is like a half mile long. Our internet is bad. So to be honest, the biggest issue for us was, hey, Flourish is a web-based application and our internet is not good. We figured out like, oh, in the worst case scenarios now, like we have a hotspot. Like we figured it out, but it was at first, it was just like, oh, maybe we should consider this other option that says that it's not going to be dealing with internet outages. But that other option also told us that we were going to be able to scan things in, that we weren't going to have to send the biweekly report, that there were all these other wonderful benefits that we were going to have. So we were like, woo. And then when we actually signed up for it, those things actually didn't turn out to be true. So we couldn't scan things in. The biweekly report was not being sent automatically. And even like in terms of, yes, the one computer where it's like hardwired, where it's like on the computer, yeah, that one was fine. But the one that the inventory manager was primarily using on a laptop, he was using the web application. So he was still dealing with internet issues in his daily operation. So when we were basically, I had left the company, I came back like within about 2 months, and everyone kind of didn't seem to know how our software worked. Like that was basically, I would ask questions and there were problems that just nobody had figured out how to troubleshoot. And I was like, has anyone tried to troubleshoot these things? Because my experience with Flourish was so like, if I had found a problem, there were multiple avenues for me to ask a question. I would first check the how-to videos. I would sign on for a call with Carly and Kelly. I would like get my videos custom made from like Near and like the team. And I just had so much support to figure it all out. And it really felt like I was like, there must be something, right? I was like, oh, there must be support that you're not accessing. But when I tried to access the support, like, no, there really wasn't. And then I did kind of make a complaint with the person I was dealing with, like, can I talk to someone who knows like anything? And eventually they bumped me up like this real high up guy. And he was basically like, we don't know yet because New York State hasn't told us anything. And I was like, even like the whole experience, like when Flourish doesn't know something, like it's much more of a dialogue and a conversation. And like, we're just real with each other. Like, it's like, this is what I know. This is what I don't know. This is what it might be. I can't tell you what it's going to be, but it's just much more like wholly informative. Like, I feel like I get an understanding from Flourish about the industry and seed to sale and all of these other things on top of just it being like my third party seed to sale tracking software. Like I'll be like, how could I manage that in my inventory? And Carly would be like, oh, there's multiple ways you could choose to blah, blah, blah. And as opposed to being like, just like I have some one help number and I ask the guy questions and he always tells me he doesn't know the answer. Like, so when we decided to switch back to Flourish, the first question was, is the internet issue such a big problem? And we figured out the hotspot thing. And then my inventory manager was just super excited because he can scan everything in. And suddenly everything was faster and better. And it's intuitive. It makes sense. I just love it. And we're just happy. Like, so for instance, the other day, my inventory manager was like, I haven't been able to figure out how to use the scanner in the manufacturing runs to a bag. And I was like, let me check. So I sent an email because I wasn't like able to look into it at the time. So I just sent a quick email off to the support thing, and Near wrote back with a video and it had exactly how to do it. And then I could just forward that to my inventory manager. And he was like, great, now I know how to do this. Like it's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure.
I love to hear that. I mean, I work with Kelly, Carly, Near almost every single day. And that's something that I think that a lot of operators, and we'll just be candid here, we've gotten word that the way that it was being done for BioTrack, where you had to have a third-party integrator, that is no longer the case. So we are just being candid with you. Now Metrc is going to be a standalone system, and that's how it is in every single state, that you're able to log in your inventory, be compliant with Metrc. But I think that people really think, they see the lack of a dollar sign and say, we can just use Metrc. But people forget that, Metrc is truly what it is there for, is to be a compliant clipboard to make sure that the information is put into the system, tracked back to the state. They're able to do recalls if they need to, and to hopefully prevent inversion. That being said, there are so many things that a seed to sale software does. Albeit if it's Flourish, if it's with another third-party integrator, what you get from the software is really to be able to be efficient, be able to scan your plants, scan your inventory, be able to have an actual person speak to you from a support standpoint, and from this world that's going to AI bots and being more focused on just on those touch points that are being, computer interaction. We are still very much like you, a small team that really focuses on making sure that our operators are given the support they need. And like I said, we're not going to know every single answer to every single question. But if you ask us, we're going to do our due diligence and give you the response. And if it's not today, we'll at least let you know. But we will usually be able to be on that right away to get you at least some sort of answer. And I think that thing is something that when you do pay for a software, you might see that as, it's an overhead, it's cost. But what you're getting from that software is a lot more than just, you're just being able to track your plans. I can do the same thing in Metrc and the same thing in BioTrack. It's a completely different beast. We report up to those state systems, but the things that you can do within our software and along with our support of real human interaction, I think is really what sets us apart from the Metrcs and from the BioTracks of the world when it comes to the track and trace systems that you can log into from a government standpoint.
Yeah, if I could just add to that like part of the challenge of being in a state that's like building its industry and like the rules aren't all defined and the systems don't all exist is that we don't have like close relationships with people in other states to like ask them questions about what it's like and how you actually do these things. And I used to think about how so I used to play soccer, but I played soccer, I'm older. So like when I played soccer, it was like less popular in the United States than like it is now. And I remember I had played soccer for so long before I ever saw a professional soccer game. And there was something about finally seeing a professional soccer game and being like, oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. And I feel like sometimes that's the context that I get from the Flourish support staff. If it's not just a specific software thing, it's also like, I don't have people to tell me like, oh, this is what it's like in California. This is what it's like in Arizona. I don't know how they're going to, it's just a professional dialogue that has been very useful in like a lot of ways, even just outside like a hard and fast, like actual tech question.
What you bring up a really great point. Carly and Kelly are two of our implementation managers. Carly has been working mostly in BioTrack. Kelly has mostly worked in Metrc. And so for them to update, bouncing ideas off each other, bouncing what's New York going to look like? And so Kelly being able to bring in his insight about Metrc and how things are being tracked and the lab results and things like that are going to be a little bit more strenuous on the operators. We'll send an email out about that too. But yeah, having that experience is really what sets us apart to real operators that have worked within Flourish, that knows the software and can talk about the ins and outs about it, is something that we do pride ourselves in as well. So thank you for all that feedback. And thank you for, again, coming back to us and said, we love seeing your products. We've heard nothing but great things. You had a great article in, I think, the other magazine as well that showcased Supernaturals. That was a really great read as well. So for all of you, you should check it out if you can. We're coming close to the end of our podcast, and I'd love to end it with a final question and again, everybody comes from a different walk of life in cannabis. It's the one thing that I can say is truly colorblind. And what I love about it is the different stories of how people got into cannabis. In order to be in this industry, you're putting in twice the amount of hours for half the pay. So what made you, when did you fall in love with cannabis? What brought you to the industry to be here today, being an English teacher, writing young adult books, and now you're the head of operations sales to Supernaturals New York. So when did you fall in love with cannabis to bring yourself to this culmination here today?
So cannabis has always suited my neurobiology. And I feel like when I found it, I remember describing to people, it was like the train of my brain that was just always churning, just finally for the first time, came to a rest. Very similar to first feelings of meditation, first feelings of yoga practice, those things that kind of embody you and allow you to experience the moment. So I think at first it was just oh, this is love at first sight. And then I'm also a person who cannabis it truly is a required medicine for me day in, day out. It's not something that I require in terms of I don't deal with chronic pain. I don't have like a condition that I'm treating in that way. It makes me a more effective, efficient, capable, focused person. So in terms of handling disparate tasks, like being the director of operations and the head of sales, and the ability for my brain to kind of toggle between things and switch and suddenly be like working on like poetic web copy about strains after I just worked on an SOP and then I'm learning about fire extinguishers. Like cannabis is how I do that. And I used to feel bad about it, right? So when I was a teacher and I was hitting my volcano before I went into work, there was this thing like I couldn't be open with people about it. They thought I was using drugs before I went to work with kids. Like they wouldn't get that. Like, oh well, like you're taking a Xanax. Like you can take your thing, I can take my thing. We can both have our thing. But it really was when my husband was dealing with it was a brain injury, and the symptoms were so complicated and so confounding, and medicine knew nothing about what he was dealing with. And essentially, like what we learned was that like, oh well, like they're like basically GABA, like all these different systems that are like a function, like they address every function in your body. Like it seemed like for him, this thing was positively impacting all of those. So it was like the medicine had no idea what to do. And this thing was helping. And we started to get into like, beyond, we always vaporized flour and we would make like hash butter and we'd do all these different things. But then now we're making tinctures and oils and we're learning about onset and duration and figuring out, well, if you have insomnia, is it onset insomnia or duration insomnia? And then how do you structure your dose schedule so that you have something that's onset, but then you have something that's going to last? And then what do you put next to your bed if you wake up? Like just starting to get really kind of like more focused on it. And we learned about the concept of titration. Basically, a pharmacist was like, oh, it's fine to use it all the time. That just means you're titrated. And this whole life being like, oh, do I use weed too much? Like, oh, blah, blah, blah. When I know it's a thing that's working and then it's saving my partner's life. But like, oh, should I still judge it? And then a pharmacist was just like, no, like this is actually the right thing. This is actually the right medicine. You shouldn't be off it. You should actually just be on it. And then it was just like, okay, well, this is great because this has always felt right. Now I know it's actually working right. And I even have approval of society. And then when you just like tie the whole room together with the fact that like now I can earn my income from this, like it's literally, it combines every weird, quirky part of my personality and how like the many different things that I can do. And it lets me just stick all of it on it and solve all the problems and have all the fun. And I could not ask for a more perfect culminating career from all of the different pathways. But it really was like, it's love it like first experience. And then like that, like, oh, like, is this okay? And I always think it ties back to like, my dad also loved, my parents also loved it. My mom was a teacher. It was a huge part of my parents' life, but they had to feel guilty. So now it's just like, we're all out in the open. We're all like hardworking, smart, capable, like we're just busting the stigma left and right. I love meeting someone and they are so shocked by how much cannabis I use. And I'm just like, yes. Like, now I don't have to hide it. Now I can just be like, this is who I am. This is how I work.
I love it. I mean, it's nice not to be in the shadows anymore. I'll just say it like that. So, but Beck, this was an amazing podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh, I totally forgot, and we'll probably put this back in later. How do we get a hold of you? How do we get a hold of you? How do we get a hold of Supernaturals? We'll put up your Instagram and information on the screen. So I forgot to ask them, how do we get a hold of you?
So our brand is Supernaturals NY. So if you go to supernaturalsny.com, that's our web address. That's where all of our COAs and all that stuff is. We are the same handle on Instagram, Supernaturals NY. And then you can also reach me directly at Beck, BECK, at supernaturalsny.com. And then also I post a lot to my personal Instagram, Punky Funkster 2.0. I kind of use both of those. I used to use the like business page for like super meta compliance stuff. And then I would use mine for kind of like stuff that was a little bit more fun. But then I actually changed the business page to a personal page now too. So we can do a little bit more on both. Yeah.
Beck, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you being such an amazing guest. Supernaturals New York, once again. If you could, you'll be able to find us online. But for all of you listeners, I'm Vien, the head of marketing for Flourish Software, the host of Flourishing in Cannabis podcast. And for all my guests here, stay healthy, stay happy, and high responsibly.